Welcome to the London Free Press Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Gilbert. The OHL trade deadline was yesterday, and the London Knights were looking to boost their roster of forwards. So today I'm talking with London Free Press sports reporter Ryan Pyette about who the Knights acquired and what the rest of the season might look like for them. Hey, Ryan, how are you?
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for
Happy.
having me on again.
I'm glad that you're here. Happy New Year, even though I know it's the 11th, but I don't see enough people to stop saying that yet. I'm camped out in my
You,
basement.
you too.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's talk about what happened with the Knights in the trade deadline. They made some switches right before the deadline as well. So just kind of give us an overview of what happened before yesterday's deadline.
Yeah, it was uncommonly quiet deadline for the London Knights. I mean, there was some bits of news. Obviously, they brought in 6'6" forward Caleb Lawrence from Ottawa. It didn't cost them. You see what all these other teams are paying for guys, and they got him. He's a last year player. He just turned 21 years old, and a big guy can win faceoffs and add a little offense and grit, and that seems to be the Knights' identity this year. So the hope is he fits in well with the group that's already here, and we'll see. He's really excited to get going with the team, and that's always a good sign, right? And
Yeah.
he obviously coming to London, you come here, you expect to win, so that's what he's expecting.
Yeah. So we acquired him for an eighth round draft pick in 2026. Is that advantageous for the other team?
um, well, for Ottawa, where he came from, they really did a lot of mixing around there. As everybody knows, there's only three 20-year-old spots on each team, so there's a limit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they did some. They wanted to bring in a couple other guys. They brought in Braden Kressler from Flint, and so then you have too many, right? And so actually, the Knights we're in that situation like by adding Caleb Lawrence that with Michael Simpson and Max McHugh, that gave them what they won over the limit because you had Ethan McKinnon, right? The question marks around Ethan McKinnon who've been hurt
Mm-hmm.
since mid October. So that got straightened out when Ethan decided to step away from the game here.
Right. I'm going to talk about Ethan in a little bit, but I want to focus on Caleb Lawrence coming to London. What does he say about coming here? Is he looking forward to being in this city?
Yeah, like so Caleb, the start of his career was in Owen Sound. He was a high draft pick by Owen Sound. So obviously, Owen Sound and London are pretty good rivals, and they play in the Midwest. So he's played countless games here. I guess I can go through and add them up, but over a dozen games at Bud Gardens, right?
Mm-hmm,
So,
mm-hmm.
he went to Ottawa this year. That's where he's from. He's from Orleans, Ontario, and that's kind of a lot of times if there's a chance. We saw with Zach Giroux going from Flint to Sudbury just the other day. Sometimes guys want to play at home in their last year, right? They good soldiers for their career and that sort of thing. If you're a good person and the organization likes you and thinks you've done a good job, they'll make a trade like that for you, kind of thing. Not unlike I think it was a little different situation with Michael Simpson coming to London. Obviously, he was a Londoner that got to come here, but so but that was different because it was filling a huge need there. But now Caleb Lawrence, was gonna he thought he'd finish his career in Ottawa, which would have just made
Mm-hmm.
him happy, and he still has aspirations. He was drafted by LA a couple of years ago, so he has pro aspirations. So coming to London from Ottawa, London's in a little bit better shape than Ottawa. A bit surprising this year, but London's doing great, obviously, and they're contending. So he's happy about that. And then the plus that, if you're going to leave home and you'd love to go to a place that A can win, B can develop you. Obviously, the Hunters have a reputation for taking kids in and making them better
Yeah.
a lot of the time. So there's a guy he's hungry to do that.
Yeah. Talk about what the Knights were looking for ahead of the trade deadline. I mean, they're number two in the league, so did they really need to improve that much? Did they really need very much help?
Yeah, no, like we all get excited about the trade deadline. I mean, look at the NHL; they run like a 3 days worth of shows on it, right? When they got
Yeah,
the lists of all the guys that are available and stuff like that. It's a little different in junior hockey. Like it's a lot of them are kids that are getting moved here, so you got to be careful how it's a very an emotional time, right?
sure.
So,
Yeah,
so I don't know. The Knights they were kind of going along. They looked okay. They were inconsistent for a lot of the year. So I know that the Hunters were really looking at the team and saying, "What do we got? What do we got here?" And then right before the deadline, they go on a big winning streak, right? And they pulled themselves. Kitchener had a huge lead in the standings, as everybody know. They were off to a rocket start, and
mm-hmm.
London's closed that gap now, right? So they're on even terms, kind of thing. And Saginaw is behind the Knights, and obviously everyone knew Saginaw was going to get as many great players as they could because they got the Memorial Cup this year. So everybody knew that, and that's what happened. And the Knights kind of, I think the philosophy was if we can find, a great player that can help us, like a la Ryan Winterton last year, who came in and became the top, center on the team. And obviously they went to the OHL final, and to me, he was pretty much like, had the Knights won, he would have been the MVP. Obviously, Michael Simpson was the MVP for Peterborough, but
Mm-hmm.
this year was a little different. It was they felt like they had a good team. Easton Cowan and Denver Barkey are a year older. I think they would have liked another defenseman, but Jared Woolley has played so well, and they only need a depth defenseman because you think of who they have. They got Bonk, George, Edward, and Dickinson. And I mean, that's as good a top four. And we knew that going into the year. That's as good a top four if they stayed healthy as anybody in the league.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
so they're in good. Alec Leonard has played much improved this year. So really, it was just kind of cosmetic. Like if they needed something, like it'd be nice to have another depth guy. And I think Caleb Lawrence kind of fits that role. Like, he's not going to supplant Barkey or Cowan or Max McHugh or Gazazov for top line minutes. He's going to come in and fill a role and be a good big body that can win faceoffs. And add a little more veteran experience, which is So it wasn't a lot of moves like you see some teams do, but it was. But they think that it's enough, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's building the team, right? And I think one thing the Knights have proved over the years is their teams are always better down the stretch than there's been a few times since I've covered the team that they've got worse or stayed stale and stayed the
Mm-hmm.
same. They always seem to get better, and they're really hard to beat in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Every team knows that. They don't go quietly hardly ever, right? There's one
Right.
time against Owen Sound they got swept, but even that was all the games went to overtime and 1 goal games kind of thing when
Yeah.
Bouchard was captain here a few years ago. But yeah, I think they expect to get back to the finals, and obviously it'll be interesting to see, right? Because as we'll talk about, there was a lot of moves around the league.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna ask about the rest of the league. What were some of the top trades that you were watching?
Yeah, so Saginaw, as we know, like we talked about the Memorial Cup hosts, and it doesn't come to Saginaw every day, right? And Saginaw's never been to the finals. They've never had this kind of opportunity before in their franchise history here. So this is I know they see this as a huge moment for their club, and that they got Owen Beck from Peterborough. He's a good center draft by the Canadians, and they got Jorian Donovan from Brantford. Formerly of Hamilton, won a championship. Owen Beck's won a championship. They also got Josh Bloom back from the Canucks organization. Overager just kind of parachuted in. I've seen this happen before. So he was with North Bay and went to the pros, and now he's come back to Saginaw to play for the Memorial Cup. And he had been their captain before he was traded to North Bay. So kind of an interesting move there. But yeah, and then it cost them. Yeah, it cost them a pretty penny, you'd say. Like, Aiden Young, the young junior Knights grad, he goes to Peterborough in the Beck deal, and 11. I think it's 11 draft picks
Wow.
that they've given up, eight or 11 draft picks or something like that. So
Yeah.
a huge cost, and
Huge.
obviously, if they win 10 games next year, they don't care if they win the Memorial Cup this year, right? And some teams go through that. London a little different. They want to win. They want to win every year, right? So they don't have that boom. You look at what Peterborough did this year. Obviously, Peterborough last year beat the Knights, and they loaded up. And then this year they're probably going to finish in last place.
Okay. Um, how much impact does the trade deadline have on the rest of the season? Like, you've been covering this for a long time. Can this have a huge impact? Do you think in the Knights case in particular, will it have a big impact?
Yeah, I don't think in the Knights case, I think they got the team they got, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
but I think I've seen some years, like last year, Shane Wright went to Windsor. There's a lot of hoopla about that, and they didn't win a playoff game. Kitchener swept them in the first round. So there you're like, oh, what happened, right?
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
we've seen that, but then I also seen, the year Nick Suzuki was in Guelph, Isaac Radcliffe, he joined his pal Isaac Radcliffe in Guelph, 2019, and George Burnett, believed in his core, even though they weren't doing very well during the regular season. He believed in them, and then they had a great playoff run. They were down 0-3 to the Knights and came back and beat the Knights in the second round, and they kept doing that. Saginaw, Ottawa, and they were all of a sudden they're in the Memorial Cup, and so that was you're like, George Burnett's a genius, right? Like he made the trades and they all
Sure.
worked out. Of course, when they were down 3-0 to the Knights and going into Game 4, I'm sure nobody felt very good about it, but
Yeah.
they overcame that, and so the trade deadline is a lot of hype, and obviously everybody in hockey circles watches it. The NHL teams are all interested in it. The fans are all interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's exciting, and some years you can get lots done, and some years you can't get lots done. So pretty interesting year though. I thought it was a seller's market. So if you had assets, if you had players 19, 20-year old that you wanted to sell,
Mm-hmm.
they came out a big price this year. And that's if you know the Hunters, they're not real big on paying a big price. Now Sam Dickinson, when they were getting him at 16 years old, they paid 7 draft picks, to get him. So that's but they knew they had 3 or 4 years of him ahead of them, kind of thing. This
Development. Yeah.
this is you're paying for a half a year rental of a guy, and it's
Right.
see if it works out for some of these teams.
Yeah. Let's talk about Ethan McKinnon stepping away from hockey because of concussions and symptoms of that. He's going to be a player development coach with the team. What does his future look like with the Knights?
Yeah, so Rachel, I think we talked early in the year, like who's going to be the Knights captain, and obviously Ethan McKinnon was the highest candidate to be the captain of the team.
Mm-hmm,
They
mm-hmm.
wanted to wait a little while. Dale Hunter wanted to wait till everybody came back from NHL camps and whatnot, and then Ethan got hurt. He suffered a concussion, and it wasn't his first one. So I think we've known more over the last 15, 20 years about concussions than we ever did.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're dealing with concussions, you got your whole life ahead of you, so you got to make tough decisions. And I think this was a case where I don't think he's done with hockey. He loves it so much. Obviously, grew up here, and so everybody in the hockey circles here knows him and how much he loves the game and what kind of kid he is. And so but you need a break. Like I know from people close to me dealing with concussions, you need time, right? And
Mm-hmm.
sports doesn't wait for anybody. These hockey seasons or sports seasons, they don't wait for injuries. They just keep marching on. So you get to the deadline, you get a chance to get a guy like Caleb Lawrence. A decision had to be made, and so I just think it was a neat thing that this year you don't really see this too much, but you have a 20-year-old player who's going to transition into a coaching role, and apparently the kids, obviously, if you saw some of the social media, they all really respect him, and I don't think it will be a very big trend, even though it's going to be a big transition. Having coached even minor sports, it is a big transition player to coach, and to do it at the OHL level, not easy. But
Yeah.
be
To go
interesting
from
to see.
being a peer to now you're one of the decision makers.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
yeah,
and I think as long as it works out well, as long as he separates himself from
sure.
and becomes kind of that not a player anymore, but he's a coach and gets the respect, which I think he'll get. I think it'll be really interesting, and we'll see if maybe this is Paul Maurice is someone that the Florida Panthers coach is someone that his career ended early, and he became a coach very young. And he's still not very old, but it feels like he's been in the league for forever, right, in the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this is the start of Ethan McKinnon becoming a great coach, and maybe one day getting behind the bench and playing against the
Sure.
Hunters,
Well, he's
coaching against the Hunters.
learning from some great coaches for sure right now anyway. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are the Knights going to focus on for the rest of the season? I mean, obviously we want to go to the Memorial Cup. That's the ultimate goal, but how do you think that will play out?
Yeah, I think so. If they can, they're going to be in a battle with Kitchener and Guelph for the Midwest Division, and if they can somehow, get ahead of those teams, and they play them a bunch of times. They play Kitchener 5 more times this year, so that's 10 points up for grabs, and that could swing it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're so close right now. So if they can finish first in the Midwest, that's automatic first or second seed in the conference. So then you're looking at you're playing one of these rebuilding teams in the 8 spot or the 7 spot, and you got a good chance to go to the second round. But I think like last year, the second, third round in the West is going to be tough. Like last year, they played Sarnia in the third round, and that was no one knew who was going to win that one. And I think here, the Knights second round on, it's gonna be tough to win. They usually find a way, more often than not, they find a
Sure.
way.
Yeah.
And like they did last year, I think Sarnia was favorite last year we talked about, and they beat them. So do they have enough to win 3 of those tough series? It's hard to say because Saginaw is a real good team. Saginaw's their equal, if not better. So we'll see what happens down the road. And of course, you got to stay healthy, and you got to gel as a team, right? In the second half,
Yeah.
that's hugely important.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to be keeping up with your reporting on lfpress.com for sure, but thanks for talking with us today. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, no problem, Rach.